Yo, what's up guys? I'm Ninkey and I was the rank 1 Gwen last split and I'm top 50 challenger and I'm here to teach you how to play Gwen. But first, let me explain to you why you should play Gwen. Gwen is literally the best champion in the game right now. I'm not biased, trust me. After the item changes, she's just really strong because her items didn't get nerfed much, so she can just melt every tank, melt every ADC, just one-shots everything. Insane split pushing, insane team fighting, the list goes on. It's good if you're low elo because games go on long, so she gets the scale. It's good in high elo because if you can snowball effectively, you just 1v9 the entire game. She's pretty much the only hyper carry left in top lane that can do this. Gwen can just straight up 1v5 teams. Anyways, in this guide, I'm going to go over builds, runes, summoner spells, everything. Hope you enjoy. Oh, and also for anyone curious about matchups, I have an entire playlist of all YouTube shorts for matchups. It's got over half the top lane matchups so far, so you can check it out. I'll put it in the description. Wait, before we even start, let me tell you. If you're playing top lane, ban Garen. If you're playing jungle, ban Lilia. If you're playing mid lane, ban Senja or Hui. Okay, now we can start. Alright, so first things first, let's talk about runes. These are going to be your pretty much standard runes every game. You're going to want Conquer, Presence of Mind, Alacrity, and Last Stand. These are just the best runes from the precision tree, flat out. You'd like never change these. Some people tell me you could go Triumph instead of Presence of Mind, but I don't really like it because I just really like having a lot of mana. If you go Triumph, you get really bad mana problems early game too. For secondaries, here's where there's a lot of variation, right? You can go Inspiration and take Triple Tonic, and you can take Cosmic Insight. You could also go Domination, go Sudden Impact and Eyeball Collection. You can also go Demolish Second Wind or Demolish Bone Plating, which is usually what I run, but I've also been testing out the other ones recently. But for top lane, you can choose between all three of those, just based on what you want. Domination is more damage early game and more like AP from Eyeball Collection. Inspiration is more like you get your Ignite up faster, and then the potions just give you more skill points in your E, which is nice. And then Resolve is mainly for split pushing and for lane. It's kind of all up to preference. Like the secondary doesn't make too much of a difference. All I'd say is if you're versus range top, definitely go Second Wind Demolish. The reason why these runes are best for Gwen is because Conquer just synergizes so well with Gwen's entire kit. Like it gives you healing, it gives you AP, and the precision tree is just so nice for Gwen because you get the attack speed, you get the low health damage from Last Stand, you get the mana for Presence of Mind. It's just perfect. Never go First Strike or Electrocute. These runes are just terrible. I don't care what the Twitter guide says, it's just bad. Literally just less damage than Conquer, especially if you want to play like the normal Gwen, like Bruiser Gwen, which I do. Alright, for summoner spells, if you're playing jungle, then you want Ghost and you want Smite. If you're playing top lane, I take TP Ignite pretty much every game. Some champions I will go Ghost against. Not all range top laners, just some, like ones with easy escape and you actually need Ghost to run them down. For mid, also taking Ghost is good there, because you usually get a free lane and you don't need Ignite to help you win. But there's some unique matchups, so for example, in the Tryndamere matchup, I'd go TP Exhaust. In the Wukong matchup, I'd go Exhaust Ignite. In the Riven matchup, you can go TP Barrier. Other than that, it should just be TP Ignite every other lane. Now you know what runes and sums to take, I'm going to go over the abilities. Gwen's passive is why she's the #1 tank killer in the game. It does max % health magic damage, which is a common misconception because people think it does max % health true damage, which is just wrong. It's magic damage. That would be insanely OP. Pretty much everything in her kit applies her passive. Her ult applies it 9 times, her Q applies it 6 times if you have all the snips, and then it also heals you for half of the damage that the passive deals, which is why Gwen always does these low HP outplays. Her Q is when Gwen snips forwards in a cone, dealing true damage in the center part and magic damage in the other part. This is your core damage early game and for most of the game until you get your ult. The way your Q works is that anything you hit will grant you 1 stack, up to 4, but if you stop hitting things, you will lose all of your stacks after a couple seconds. Each stack you have before you press Q, it does 1 extra snip, increasing the damage, and each snip also applies your passive. Your initial snip does very little damage, then does a final snip at the end that does a lot of damage. And since your snips apply your passive, it's really, really strong. And most of the time you want to be aiming towards the center of the Q so you can get the true damage, because it converts half of the damage to true damage and the other half does magic damage. Alright, moving on to Gwen's W. This is another broken part of her kit. Pretty much, her W creates this zone where she's untargetable and nobody from the outside can hit her unless they walk into it. If Gwen walks outside of her W, it repositions it back on top of her. And you can also recast it and it'll also reposition it back to where you are. However, once it repositions once, you can't reposition it again. So if you walk out, it's just gone. You also get bonus MR and armor scaling with how much AP you have. So building AP equals more tankiness, pretty much. Her W is really good against range champs because it makes it so you can hit the melees in the team fight and the range just can't hit you, so you can ignore them. You can also just engage on the range champs and they just can't hit you back. Some things to note is that when you're untargetable, this doesn't mean that burns don't do damage. So for example, if Gangplank hits his passive auto on you and walks out of your W, his burn still does damage. Same thing with Ignite. If someone ignites you and they walk out of your W, you're still taking damage. Alright, next up we got the E. Gwen's E is a short range dash and you can control how long it's going to be. You can do it at the max distance or you can do it like pretty short as an auto reset. It also empowers her auto attacks for the next few seconds, giving her more attack range and on hit magic damage. So pretty much if you're fighting, you always want to have your E auto attack enhancement up. Also, the first thing you auto attack after pressing the E refunds a little bit of the cooldown, which scales hard with levels, which is why earlier I mentioned triple tonic's good. That's why. You can make the cooldown really short if you get that skill point early. So your E pretty much acts exactly like an Aatrox E. You can move your Q with it. It can be short range or long range, and it can be used as an auto attack reset. The only difference is Aatrox's E doesn't enhance his attacks and doesn't refund the cooldown. Alright, next up, Gwen's ultimate. Her ultimate has 3 casts. The first one fires 1 needle, the second one fires 3 needles, and the last one fires 5 needles. Each ult cast slows and progressively does more damage based on how many needles you've thrown. So since the third cast is 5 needles, it obviously does more than the second cast that does 3 needles. There's a little bit of cast time between each ultimate cast, so try to use abilities or basic attacks in between casts. Aim to use the first 1 to 2 casts of the ult to close the gap, then use the third one right on top of the enemy so you really can't miss it. Oh, and also each cast applies your passive. First, I'm going to go over some normal trading combos, the first one being the EQ combo. This is just a normal trading combo that you do in lane for poke damage, and you can also add an auto attack at the end if they're really close. You can also change the order of this and do the QE combo, which does the first snip, then moves the rest of the Q into the enemy. This is good to do if your E hasn't come off cooldown yet and you want to land a Q on them. So right as your E comes up, you can move it into them. And since your first snip doesn't do much damage, it's about the same damage as the EQ combo, except it's just less predictable. Now the most important combo is the edging combo, where you press EWQ almost exactly at the same time, but slightly before one another. This combo puts you a few steps away from the perfect edge of the W, and it's good to trade people in lane without them being able to hit you back. It's also a really good combo to engage team fights with. You can also change the ability, and you can do this with your ultimate instead of your Q. So you can do EWR instead of EWQ. I'm not going to go too in depth into all the combos, but it's mainly just common sense. Engage with EWQ or EWR, then weave in abilities and auto attacks. Alright, I think that covers abilities, so now I'm going to talk about builds. Pretty much on Gwen, for starting item, you want to go Doran's Ring and 2 potions every single game. D-Shield is just really bad because if you use your Gwen W properly, you can pretty much ignore poke damage using mana. So you don't really need D-Shield if you use your W properly. And when you go D-Shield, you literally just have 0 mana the entire laning phase, and it just feels terrible to play. Alright, for this current split, the items you want to be going every game, Nashor's Tooth or Riftmaker, then Shadow Flame, then Void Staff, then Rabadons. This is your core build pretty much every game, but I'll go over some exceptions to it right now. So you can go Nashor's Tooth if you know that you're really good at split pushing and that's what you want to do for most of the game. And if you're just versus like a normal bruiser or whatever, like any champ that's just going to fist fight you. If you're versus like a tank or something, or you have a really free lane and you need the tankiness from Riftmaker to survive in team fights, then it's good. Since I like to split push, I just go Nashor's Tooth every game, no exceptions. And second, we have Shadow Flame, right? This is just Gwen's best item right now on the patch. It's just a super OP item. It didn't get hit that hard by the nerfs. So I just love going it every game. You can go Void Staff second instead of Shadow Flame if they're starting to stack a lot of MR. So if your team's like full AP and they're building a bunch of MR, Void Staff second's good. But going Nashor's Tooth, Shadow Flame, Void is just the best combo. It does more than Rabadons. And Rabadons cost 600 more gold. Rabadons is the best 4th item because it just amplifies all of your damage after getting your main core builds. And then for your last item, it's pretty situational. You can go Zanyas, you can go Banshees, you can go Lichbane, literally whatever you want. Alright, now that the build is done, let's go into early laning phase. Now the way you should be playing Gwen in lane is pretty much, you first have to recognize if it's a matchup that Gwen wins the early game or not. If you do win the early game, then you want to walk up and hit the minions, get your Q stacks, and then just perma fight them the entire laning phase. My playstyle goal is either to kill them before their jungler comes, or make their jungler come, I'll die and I'll burn a lot of their summoner spells and then kill them anyways afterwards. If it's a champion that Gwen doesn't beat in the early game, then you kind of have to just give up the lane, let them push into you, and then you can kind of do the same thing, except you wait till level 6 before you start fighting them a lot. Because Gwen pretty much wins most matchups at level 6. I'll give you some examples. Champions I would do the first playstyle versus, like Aatrox, Yone, Yasuo. Any champion that you kind of just win the lane against, they can't really do anything. Or tanks in general too. Then champions I would run the second playstyle against, where you kind of just AFK farm and you kind of wait till level 6. I do that versus like Darius, Tryndamere, Jax. Your early lane plan should be either farm safely and just try to scale if it's a losing lane, or just permafight them and try to snowball an aggressive lead if it's a winning lane. Keep in mind, a lot of junglers are going to camp you if you play Gwen because you're a flashless top laner and they just know it's a free kill. So be ready to get cheese ganked level 3 or just have jungles path top in general. In the mid game, you're pretty much looking to sit in the side lane the entire time and play for tier 1 or tier 2 turrets. You just want to maximize your income to get to your item spikes as fast as possible. And also as Gwen, you can really look to cheese people in the side lane. So just play with vision, try to get an oracle lens, maybe sweep the bushes, and just flank people and kill them. Especially if the enemy team has a mage, try to side lane versus their mage, because it's always a free kill. The mid game is really just about playing good macro and just looking to see opportunities to take turrets. Pretty much never go for team fights on Gwen, especially if your ult is down. However, when we get towards the late game, that's when Gwen is really good at team fighting, because you have 3 items, 4 items, and then you can just kind of run in team fights and just one-shot people. But definitely pre 2 items, you really don't want to look for team fights. Pretty much in the mid game, only go for team fights if it's like guaranteed free kills and you have a flank. If you don't have a flank, you're pretty much not going to win front to back because people will just run away from you and you won't have enough damage to finish them off. And even in the late game, you have to recognize if the enemy team is a really bad comp for Gwen to play into, then you kind of just have to sit side lane all game. In these situations, I'll just go look to backdoor them. You just want to create a big problem for the enemy team by split pushing all game. And then your team can use that to come back into the game. A good rule of thumb is always be on the opposite side of the objective when you're playing Gwen. Even if your TP is down, if you're there at the right time, you can just start a huge split push. You can just take an inhib or maybe even the Nexus turrets. But then the second you hit level 16, 3-4 item power spike, you just group with your team and you fight for the rest of the game. Assuming their team comp is somewhat playable for Gwen. Quickly, I'm just going to go over Gwen's strength and weaknesses based on like certain team comps. The number one thing that counters Gwen is CC. If the enemy team can CC lock you for 10 seconds, your champ is completely useless. Also, if they have high mobility and high dashes champions where they can just like run away from you or dodge your abilities, it just makes it really hard to play. And then finally, there's a couple of champions that just stat check Gwen no matter what, like for example, Garen. Other than that, Gwen is just really strong because Gwen is really good into tanks, really good into mages, really good into ADCs, and really good into bruisers. Pretty much she only just gets countered by the things I mentioned earlier, which is why Gwen is like almost a good pick every single game. I also just wanted to note, if you guys are playing Gwen jungle, pretty much my playstyle for this role is you just want to full clear, and you just really don't want to interact with the enemy jungler at all, unless it's like a really free matchup. But most of the time it won't be, so most of the time you're just full clearing, getting to your first item, doing grubs, because doing dragons is more like coin flip, right? Because you're just fighting on the side of the bot lane, so it's harder to get dragons compared to grubs. Gwen jungle is more kind of just about power farming. And then once you get to your item spikes, like 1, 2, 3 items, then you're just kind of running around, perma-fighting, taking skirmishes, and fighting objectives. And early ganks can be good on Gwen, but usually only go for ganks if it's like guaranteed free kill, or you have to like cover a dive or something. Other than that, you should just be full clearing and invading. Well, let me know if you guys have any questions and just write them down in the comments. I'll try to answer every single question.